They told her the Alpha King had no heart, that he had stood before 6 mate ceremonies and walked away from every single one. That the most beautiful, most powerful, most politically connected women in the 5 territories had offered themselves to him, and he had looked through each of them as if they were made of smoke. They said his wolf was dead inside him. That some ancient curse ran through the Kaelstrom bloodline, turning its kings into creatures of ice and ash. That the throne of Arendor would pass without an heir because its ruler was incapable of feeling anything at all. Soraya had heard all the rumors. She had laughed at some and pitied the man in others. But she had never expected to become part of his story. Because Soraya was no one. She was a kitchen girl in the lower ward of Ashenmere, the capital city that sprawled beneath the black spires of the royal citadel. She scrubbed pots. She hauled water from the well before dawn. She kneaded bread until her arms ached and her fingers cracked from the flour and the cold. And on the rare evenings when the rain came, she danced. Not for anyone, not for applause or coin or attention. She danced because it was the only time she felt like something other than invisible. The rain washed away the smell of grease and ash. It softened the calluses on her hands. It turned the cobblestones into a mirror that reflected the sky, and for a few stolen minutes, Soraya could pretend she was standing on clouds. She had no idea that on this particular evening someone was watching. The rain had come without warning, a sudden downpour that sent merchants scrambling to cover their stalls and drove the evening crowd indoors. Soraya had been crossing the lower courtyard with an empty flour sack over her head when the first heavy drops struck the stones. She should have run for shelter like everyone else. Instead, she stopped. The courtyard was emptying fast. Lantern light spilled from doorways as people disappeared inside. Within moments, she was alone in the open square, rain hammering down around her in silver sheets. Soraya closed her eyes. The melody came from somewhere deep inside her, a humming that vibrated through her bones. She did not know where she had learned it. Her mother had died when she was too young to remember lullabies. Her father had followed 2 winters later. The melody simply existed within her, as natural as breathing, as old as the rain itself. Her feet began to move. She spun slowly at first, arms outstretched, face tilted toward the sky. The rain plastered her dark hair to her neck and shoulders. Her threadbare dress clung to her body, but she did not care. There was no one to see, no one to judge, no one to remind her that kitchen girls did not dance in courtyards like they owned them. The melody built, and her movements quickened. She leaped over a puddle, landed on the balls of her feet, twisted into a turn that sent water arcing from her fingertips. Something stirred beneath her skin as she moved, something warm and electric that she had never been able to name. She did not know it was magic. She did not know that where her bare feet touched the wet stone, faint impressions of light lingered for half a heartbeat before fading. She did not know that the rain around her had begun to fall in patterns, spiraling inward as if drawn to her body by some invisible force. And she did not know that 300 feet above her, standing on the obsidian balcony of the royal tower, the Alpha King of Arendor had stopped breathing. Kaelstrom had not felt anything in 6 years, not since the night his father died and the full weight of the Kaelstrom curse settled into his bones. His wolf, once fierce and restless, had gone silent. His ability to sense the bonds that connected wolves to their mates had withered to nothing. The healers called it soul frost, a condition so rare it appeared only once in the old texts, and even then, only as a warning. A cursed alpha will know no mate. His wolf will sleep, his heart will calcify, and when the frost reaches his core, he will become stone, and his line will end. 6 mate ceremonies. 6 times the council had paraded candidates before him, women of noble blood whose wolves called out to his in desperation. 6 times Kale had stood on the dais and felt nothing. No pull, no recognition, no flicker of warmth in the frozen wasteland of his chest. Tonight, he had come to the balcony because the rain usually helped him think. The sound of it against the stone was one of the few sensations that still registered in his deadened senses. But tonight, something else registered. A flash of movement in the courtyard below. Kale tracked the figure automatically. A girl. Young. Dark hair. Soaked through and spinning in the rain like a wild thing. He almost looked away. And then she turned. And the light from a distant lantern caught her face, and Kale felt something crack inside his chest. It was not subtle. It was not a gentle stirring or a quiet awakening. It was violent, like a fist punching through a wall of ice. Pain exploded behind his ribs, so sudden and so fierce that he staggered backward, his hand slamming against the balcony rail. His wolf moved. For the first time in those long, barren years, the creature inside him stirred. Not fully, not with the roaring vitality it had once possessed, but something. A twitch, a breath, a single rasping word that echoed through Kyle's stunned consciousness. Mate. No, that was impossible. He was cursed. The healers had confirmed it. The soul frost had killed his ability to bond. And yet, his wolf had spoken. And yet the ice in his chest was fracturing. And yet he could not tear his gaze away from the girl dancing in the rain below. She moved like water given human form. And around her, though she clearly did not know it, the rain itself was bending to her will. Droplets hung suspended in the air near her outstretched hands before falling in spirals that followed the arc of her movements. She had power, raw, untrained, and utterly unaware. And she was calling to his wolf with every step. Kale's hand tightened on the rail until the iron groaned beneath his grip. "Draven," he said. The voice that emerged from his throat was rough, scraped raw by years of disuse. Behind him, his first beta materialized from the shadows of the tower chamber. Draven had served the Kalestrom line for 20 years, and in all that time, he had never heard his king speak with anything other than flat, frozen calm. The sound that came from Kale now was something else entirely. "My king?" Draven stepped forward. "What is wrong?" "The girl, in the courtyard." Draven moved to the rail and looked down. "The kitchen servant?" "Soraya, I believe. She works in the lower ward scullery." "Bring her to me," Kale said. Draven went still. In 2 decades of service, the Alpha King had never once requested someone be brought to his presence. "My king, the hour is late. Perhaps in the morning." "Now." The word carried the weight of an Alpha command, something Kale had not used in years. It rippled through the air between them, and Draven's wolf responded instinctively, lowering his head in submission. Kale finally looked away from the courtyard. When Draven saw his face, the beta took an involuntary step backward. Because the Alpha King's eyes, which had been the color of dead winter for as long as Draven could remember, were burning. Not amber. Not gold. Something deeper. More ancient. Like embers buried beneath ash that had suddenly been fed oxygen. "Do not frighten her," Kale said quietly. "She is important." Draven stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in the old warrior's expression. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Understood, my king." Soraya was wringing the rain from her hair when they came for her. She had barely made it back to the kitchens when the head cook seized her arm. "What have you done?" Marin hissed, her broad face white with fear. "The king's guard is here. For you." Before Soraya could answer, a shadow filled the kitchen doorway. Draven was exactly as the rumors described him. Tall, weathered, with eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. "Soraya, I am Draven, first beta to King Kale. Will you come with me, please?" "Please." Soraya noted the word with numb surprise. Betas did not say please to kitchen girls. She smoothed her soaked dress with shaking hands. Draven hesitated, then removed his own cloak and draped it around her shoulders. There is no time to change, but this will serve. The walk through the citadel was the longest of her life. She had never been above the lower ward. Now she climbed stairs she did not know existed, passed through corridors of polished black stone, walked beneath archways carved with wolves so lifelike she could see their individual fangs. With every step, the air grew colder. And with every step, something inside Soraya grew warmer. The doors to the king's private chamber were carved from a single piece of blackwood. The room beyond was vast and nearly empty. No fire burned in the massive hearth. The only light came from candles near the far window, where a figure stood with his back to the door. "Leave us," Kale said without turning. Drevin bowed his head and withdrew. The great doors closed. Soraya stood in the center of the king's chamber in a borrowed cloak and a soaked dress, dripping rainwater onto stone that had probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. Kale turned to face her. Up close, the coldness was worse than she had imagined. His features were striking, sharp cheekbones, pale gray eyes framed by dark lashes, but there was no warmth in any of it. His face was a landscape after a killing frost, everything still and brittle and waiting to shatter. Except his eyes. His eyes were wrong. Where everything else was frozen, they burned with something that made Soraya's breath catch. "You were dancing in the rain," Kale said. "I am sorry, Your Majesty. I did not know anyone was watching." "Do not apologize. What were you doing? With the water?" She thought of the way the droplets sometimes seemed to hang in the air near her fingertips. She had always dismissed it as imagination. "I do not have any power," she said carefully. "I am a common wolf. Kitchen-born." "Your wolf," Kyle said. "Can you feel it now?" Soraya hesitated. Her wolf had always been faint, more of a whisper than a presence. But right now, in this room, standing before this man, her wolf was not whispering. It was screaming. Soraya stumbled backward as the sensation overwhelmed her. Her wolf was clawing toward the surface, straining toward Kale as if it recognized him on a level her human mind could not comprehend. Kale closed his eyes. "I was told I would never feel this, that the curse had killed it, that I was beyond saving." He opened his eyes, and they blazed. "But my wolf knows you. It woke for you." Soraya's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. "What did it say?" Kale looked at her with an expression that held years of frozen silence and the first trembling crack of thaw. "Mate." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "That cannot be right," she managed. "I scrub pots. I haul flour. I cannot be the mate of a king." "And yet you are." Kale closed the distance between them. "Because they were not you. My wolf did not choose. Fate did. And fate does not care about bloodlines or politics." He raised his hand slowly, fingers hovering beside her face. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. Kyle's fingertips brushed her cheek. The world exploded. Light burst behind Soraya's eyes, white and blinding. She felt heat surge from her chest and pour through the point of contact between his skin and hers. Kale gasped, a raw, broken sound, and his other hand came up to cradle her face. Through the blinding white, Soraya felt something she had never experienced. A thread, gossamer thin and burning with golden light, stretching between her heart and his. A bond, fragile and new and impossibly real. The light faded. They stood inches apart, both breathing hard. "You felt it," Kyle said. Not a question. "Yes. What do we do now?" Before Kale could answer, the chamber doors burst open. Draven stood in the entrance, his face ashen. "Forgive the intrusion, my king. The council has called an emergency session. They know you summoned a kitchen girl to your chambers, that your eyes have changed color." Draven paused. Lord Havroth is calling for the seventh mate ceremony. He has invoked the Frost Edict. The color drained from Kyle's face. What is the Frost Edict? Soraya asked. An ancient law, Kale said. It states that if an Alpha King's curse renders him unable to bond naturally, the council may select a mate on his behalf. The edict requires 6 failed ceremonies as proof of the curse. I have now met that threshold. They can force you to take a mate? They can assign one. The formal bonding still requires a claiming bite, and I will refuse. The law allows 30 days. If no claiming occurs, the assignment dissolves. His gaze held hers. During those 30 days, you disappear. You leave the citadel, and I endure Valeria Havroth's presence while searching for a way to break the edict. The bond recoiled at the suggestion. Soraya felt it physically, a sharp pull that made her gasp. We just found each other, she whispered. And you want to send me away? I want to keep you alive. Soraya rose and placed her hand flat against his chest. Light pulsed through the contact. Kyle shuddered, his hand pressing hers harder against his heart. Feel that, she said fiercely. Does that feel like something that can survive 30 days apart? A knock shattered the moment. Draven's voice came through the doors, tight with urgency. My king, the council will not wait. Lord Havroth has brought armed men to the assembly hall. Kale's expression hardened. Stay here. Draven will guard this room. Do not open the door for anyone but him. Promise me, he said. I promise, she whispered. Kale lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. I will come back for you. Whatever happens in that hall, whatever I must endure, I will come back. He did not look back. The doors closed behind him, and Soraya sank to the floor, praying that the man walking toward his enemies would find his way back to her. She did not hear the soft scrape of a hidden door opening in the wall behind the cold hearth, and she did not see the shadow that slipped into the room on silent feet, carrying a vial of something that smelled like winter and tasted like forgetting. Soraya woke on the floor of the king's chamber with no memory of how she had fallen asleep. Her head throbbed. Her mouth tasted of something metallic and wrong, like old coins soaked in ice water. She pushed herself upright, blinking against bright morning light flooding through the window. Morning light. She scrambled to her feet. The last thing she remembered was Kale walking through the blackwood doors. The last thing she remembered was the bond stretching between them like a thread of spun gold. After that, nothing. A gap in her memory as clean and deliberate as a cut. Her hand flew to her chest. The warmth was still there, faint but present. A dim glow where last night it had blazed. She reached for the bond, searching for Kale's presence on the other end. She found only cold. Not the complete absence she would have expected if the bond had been severed. More like a wall had been placed between them. His emotions, his presence, the living pulse of their connection, all of it muffled, distant, as if someone had wrapped the thread in layers of frost. On the floor beside the chair where she had slept, a tiny glass vial lay on its side, empty. A single drop of pale liquid clung to its rim. She picked it up with shaking fingers and brought it to her nose. Winter, cold stone, the smell of forgetting. Someone had drugged her. She lunged for the chamber doors and wrenched them open. The corridor beyond was empty. No Draven, no guards. The torches in their iron brackets had burned down to stubs. Later she would learn that Havroth's men had attacked Draven the moment Kale left for the assembly. 3 soldiers overwhelming him in the stairwell, breaking his ribs and dragging him to the eastern barracks before the hidden intruder ever touched the chamber door. But right now, Soraya only knew she was alone, and that something terrible had happened while she slept. She ran. Her bare feet slapped against polished stone as she tore through corridors she barely recognized from the night before. She ran downward, following instinct, following the muffled pulse of the bond, following the desperate certainty that she was already too late. The sounds reached her before she found the hall. Hundreds of voices raised in a cacophony, cheering, howling, the thunder of fists striking tables. Celebration. Soraya burst through an arched doorway and found herself on a narrow gallery overlooking the great assembly hall of Ashenmere. The scene below froze her blood. The hall was packed. Every seat filled, every aisle crammed with wolves in ceremonial dress. On the raised dais at the far end, beneath the ancient banners of the 5 territories, stood Kale, rigid in black and silver. And beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, stood a woman Soraya had never seen before. Tall, auburn hair cascading over bare shoulders, a gown the color of fresh blood, embroidered with the iron fang sigil that Soraya now recognized from the banners flanking the eastern wall, Valeria Havroth. By the power of the Frost Edict, an elderly wolf in ceremonial robes announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall. The bond between Alpha King Kale and Lady Valeria of House Havroth is hereby sanctioned. The claiming period of 30 days begins at this hour. She was too late. The ceremony had already happened. While she lay drugged on the floor, while the vial's poison muffled the bond and stole her awareness, the council had done exactly what Kale had feared. They had assigned him a mate. Soraya searched his face from the gallery above, desperate for any sign of the man who had kissed her hand and promised to return. His expression was blank. His eyes were the pale, dead gray they had been before she danced in the rain. No warmth, no recognition. The wall between them was not just muffling their connection, she realized. It was muffling him. Whatever had been in that vial, it had not been meant for her alone. It had reached through the bond. It had carried the cold back into his chest. It had buried the fire that her presence had ignited and replaced it with the same emptiness that had imprisoned him for years. They had not just drugged her. They had refrozen the king. Lord Havroth rose from his seat in the front row. He was a broad man, iron-haired, with the cold precision of someone who had spent decades building toward this exact moment. The Havroth family is honored beyond measure. My daughter will serve as a worthy queen. And then Valeria looked up. Their eyes met across the vast hall. Soraya expected confusion, expected the woman to look through her the way nobles always looked through servants. Instead, Valeria smiled. It was a small, precise smile, a smile that said, "I know exactly who you are. I know exactly what you are to him. And I want you to watch what happens next." Valeria turned to Kyle, rose on her toes, and pressed her lips to his cheek. The king did not react, did not move, did not blink. Soraya backed away from the gallery rail. Her vision blurred. The muffled warmth in her chest was guttering, and she could not tell if it was the drug stealing it from her or the sight of another woman's lips on the man whose wolf had whispered mate just hours ago. She had to leave. Not just the gallery, the citadel itself if necessary. If she stayed, they would kill her. If she ran, she might lose Kale forever. And if the drug continued to suppress the bond, she might lose him anyway. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall and made a decision that felt like dying. She would go to the one person who had never lied to her. The one person who might know how to fight a poison she could not name. Marin. Marin did not look surprised to see her. The head cook was alone in the lower kitchens, the rest of the staff having been summoned to serve at the ceremony feast. She stood at the long preparation table, her thick arms dusted with flour, her expression carved from the same hard stone as the citadel walls. "Sit," Marin said before Soraya could speak, "and tell me what they gave you." Soraya sank onto the bench beside the bread ovens. The warmth from the dying coals seeped into her frozen limbs. "How do you know someone gave me something?" "Because your eyes are wrong." Marin set down her rolling pin and crossed to a heavy cabinet against the far wall. She produced a ceramic jar sealed with wax and began mixing its contents into a cup of hot water. "Drink this first, then talk." The liquid was bitter and dark, tasting of burnt roots and something sharply medicinal. But as it reached her stomach, Soraya felt an immediate loosening. The muffled quality of the bond eased slightly, like fog lifting from a valley. Soraya told her everything. The summoning. The chamber. The moment Kale's fingers touched her cheek, and the world turned to light. The bond. The word his wolf had spoken. The frost edict. Kale's departure for the assembly. And then the gap. The empty vial. And waking to find the ceremony already completed. Marin listened without interruption. When Soraya finished, the head cook closed her eyes and released a long, slow breath. I had hoped this day would not come, and I had prayed that if it did, I would be ready. Ready for what? Marin opened her eyes. Something in her gaze had shifted. The head cook was still there, flour-dusted and practical, but beneath the familiar surface Soraya glimpsed something older, harder, more dangerous. I am not just a cook, child. I have not been just a cook for a very long time. I was a healer of the old order, a keeper of the deep knowledge, the kind that existed before the noble houses claimed all magic as their birthright and declared common-born power an abomination. Marin's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly on the table. I came to this kitchen 23 years ago to hide and to watch. Watch for what? For you. The word dropped into the space between them like a stone into deep water. There is a prophecy, Marin continued, older than the Kalestrom bloodline. It speaks of a bond that will break the frost curse, not through noble blood, but through common fire, through a wolf born without rank who carries the old magic in her veins. Water magic, Soraya, the rarest and most ancient gift, the one the noble houses tried to eradicate because they could not control it. Soraya's throat constricted. My mother. Your mother was the last water singer in Arendor. She did not die of fever, child. She was murdered. By agents of the Territorial Council who feared what her power represented. The kitchen tilted around Soraya. She gripped the edge of the bench to keep from sliding to the floor. And my father? He discovered who had killed her. He tried to bring proof before the old king. Marin's expression was heavy with grief. He disappeared the following winter. I do not believe it was an accident. Soraya's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. 20 years of believing her parents had simply been unlucky. That fate had dealt her a cruel hand. That she was alone because the world was indifferent. She was not alone because of indifference. She was alone because someone had deliberately made her so. The vial, Soraya managed. What was in it? Frost extract, the same compound that fuels the Kalestrom curse. It is not a natural affliction, Soraya. It never was. The Havroths created it. They have been poisoning the royal bloodline for over a century, ensuring that Kalestrom kings never bond naturally. Because a true mate bond between a Kalestrom alpha and a water singer would produce an heir with power enough to reshape the entire kingdom. And now they have refrozen him. Through the bond, yes. The frost extract was administered to you because you are the conduit. Your connection to Kale carries your warmth into his core. Poison the conduit, and the warmth cannot reach him. Marin gripped Soraya's hand. The man you spoke to last night, the one who burned for you, he is being buried alive inside his own body. The image seared through Soraya's mind. Kyle, trapped behind the ice, conscious but unable to feel, unable to reach her. How do I break through? She demanded. 3 things. First, the full antidote, but the key ingredient grows 3 days north of here. Second, a direct physical connection to the king sustained long enough for your water magic to burn through the frost from inside. Third, the truth spoken publicly before the entire kingdom. No one will believe a kitchen girl. No, they will not. Marin moved to the heavy cabinet again. From its depths, she withdrew something wrapped in oilcloth. She unwound the fabric to reveal a leather journal, cracked and ancient, its pages yellow with age. But they might believe this. Soraya took the journal carefully. The handwriting inside was cramped and precise, the ink faded but legible. Dates, names, quantities. A meticulous record of frost extract deliveries spanning over 100 years, each entry signed with the Havroth family seal. Your father stole this from Lord Havroth's private study the night before he disappeared. He brought it to me because he believed that someday his daughter would need it. Soraya pressed the journal to her chest. Her father's last act had not been one of desperation. It had been one of foresight. He had seen 20 years into the future and placed the weapon she needed into the hands of the only person who would know when to deliver it. Then Marin moved to the back wall and pressed her hand against a stone that looked identical to every other stone around it. The wall shifted. A narrow passage opened, exhaling air that smelled of damp stone and old secrets. The citadel is older than the noble houses. Its builders left passages that no lord has ever mapped. This leads to old water channels beneath the royal wing. Water channels, Soraya repeated. Water, child. Your element. The channels have been dry for decades, but the stone remembers. And so will your magic. The passage beneath the kitchen was barely wide enough for Soraya's shoulders. She moved through absolute darkness, one hand trailing along the damp stone wall, the other clutching the leather journal inside her dress. Marin's second dose of antidote burned warm in her stomach, and with every step, the bond grew incrementally clearer. Kale was above her. She could feel him like a distant heartbeat, faint and muffled but undeniably present. And as her awareness sharpened, so did something else. His pain. It came in waves. Not physical, though there was some of that too. This was the anguish of a man who had been awake inside his own paralysis, screaming into a void that swallowed every sound. He knew what had been done to him, and he could not stop it. She reached the eastern cellars within an hour. There, cutting through the cellar floor in a channel 3 feet wide, was the old waterway. Dry. Centuries of neglect had left only cracked stone. But when Soraya dropped into the channel and pressed both palms against the floor, she felt it. Water. Deep beneath the stone. A vast underground reservoir the citadel's original builders had tapped to supply the fortress. Soraya closed her eyes and hummed. The melody reached downward into the stone. The channel trembled. Water seeped through cracks, pooling around her knees, glowing faintly where it touched her skin. Her magic was not just the ability to move water. It was the ability to infuse it with warmth and light. She walked north through the channels, water flowing with her, and pushed the warmth outward through the bond. Tiny tendrils of heat began to penetrate the wall between her and Kale. She felt the moment he noticed. A jolt. A surge of desperate awareness, like a drowning man feeling a rope brush against his fingers. She climbed a vertical shaft into the royal wing's bathing chamber, crept past tapestries depicting Havroth victories, and found Kale in a cold, sparse room. Havroth had moved him from the tower to the royal wing, where his own people had been replaced by Havroth guards. He was a prisoner. Kale lay motionless beneath thin linens, pale as marble. His breathing shallow, each exhale carrying a faint mist, as if the air around him was freezing. His hands rigid on his chest, fingers curled inward, and his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with the flat, empty gaze she had seen from the gallery. No recognition, no awareness. But the bond told a different story. She could feel him behind the wall of frost, hammering, fighting with every ounce of strength he possessed to reach the warmth he could feel emanating from her body. I am here, she whispered, sinking onto the bed beside him. Kyle, I am here. She took his rigid hand. The frost hit her like a physical blow. Cold so intense it burned, racing up her arms. For a terrible moment she thought the cold would win. Then her water magic answered. It surged through the contact point. Light bloomed between their clasped hands and the frost retreated. Not far, not fast, but enough. His fingers twitched. Come back to me. Fight it. I know you can feel me. His lips moved. No sound, but she read the shape of her name on his mouth. Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes shifted from the ceiling to her face. The flat gray fractured, hairline cracks of amber bleeding through like dawn breaking through overcast sky. His fingers uncurled and wrapped around hers. Light surged up both their arms. Through the cracks, she felt him. Rage, vast and volcanic, grief for the years stolen from him, and directed at her, a gratitude so profound it bordered on worship. You came for me, his voice whispered through the bond. They told me you had fled, that you had taken gold and disappeared, that the bond was a hallucination caused by my deteriorating mind. Lies, all of it. I believed them. His mental voice cracked with shame. For a moment, before the frost closed completely, I believed them. The frost made you believe. That is what it does. It is not your fault. His hand tightened around hers. The amber was spreading, pushing back the dead gray. And then footsteps sounded in the corridor. Go, he urged. If they find you here? The journal. Your father told my father about it 20 years ago. My father died before he could act on it. The proof is what matters. If you can expose the Havroths, the frost loses its power. All of it. She pressed her lips to his frozen knuckles. I will come back. I know. 27 days. Make it less. She released his hand. The frost rushed back, and she watched in agony as the amber faded from his eyes, replaced by flat gray. But just before the cold swallowed him completely, his lips moved one final time. Dance for me again. Soraya choked back a sob, slipped from the bed, and disappeared through the bathing chamber. She was 3 floors below, waist deep in the old water channel, when Valeria entered the king's chamber and found nothing out of place. Nothing except a single drop of water on the king's pillow, and a faint trace of golden light on his right hand that faded before she could identify what it was. Soraya spent the next 4 days in the spaces between walls. Marin's network of hidden passages threaded through the citadel like veins through a body, connecting kitchens to cellars to forgotten storage rooms that had not seen light in decades. Soraya moved through them like a ghost, sleeping in alcoves behind stone, eating what Marin smuggled to her, and spending every available hour in the water channels beneath the royal wing. Each night, she climbed the shaft to the bathing chamber. Each night, she crept to Kale's door and listened for the guard's rotation. And each night, when the corridor fell silent, she slipped inside and took his hand. The pattern became ritual, her warmth against his frost. The bond cracking open, amber bleeding through gray, his voice growing stronger with every visit. On the first night, he could only manage single words, her name. Please, stay. On the second night, fragments. They are watching. Valeria comes every morning. She speaks to me as if I am already hers. On the third night, something longer. Draven is alive. They have him confined in the eastern barracks. He tried to reach my chamber the morning of the ceremony. Havroth's men broke 3 of his ribs. On the 4th night, his hand closed around hers with real strength for the first time. Tell me about the journal. Every Kalestrom king for 5 generations has been poisoned, she told him, her voice barely above a breath. Your father, your grandfather, all of them. The curse is a lie, Kyle. Your bloodline was never broken. It was sabotaged. His rage built like pressure behind a dam. The amber burned brighter than she had seen it yet. My father, he said aloud, his actual voice raw and cracked from disuse. He knew. He suspected. He was working with my father to prove it. But they were both silenced before they could act. How many lives were hollowed out by a poison someone chose to administer? Too many. But it ends with us. The claiming feast, Kale said, the strategic intelligence of a king breaking through the fog. On the 15th day of the claiming period, tradition requires a feast where the assigned mate presents herself before the 5 territories. Every pack leader, every elder, every noble house sends a representative. Havroth cannot refuse the audience without breaking protocol. When is it? 11 days from now. Can you hold on that long? His thumb traced a slow circle on her palm. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the frozen prison of his body, that her eyes burned. 11 days with you is not holding on. It is being given a reason to fight. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Through the cracks in the frost, his emotions poured through unfiltered. I have never wanted anything, he whispered against her skin. The frost took wanting from me. It took hunger and hope, and the ability to imagine a future. And now you are here, and I want everything, and I am terrified that I have forgotten how to deserve it. You do not have to deserve it, Soraya whispered back. You just have to survive long enough to receive it. Boots on stone. The guard rotation was early. I will wait for you until the stars burn out. He pushed through the bond as the frost reclaimed him. 11 days until the claiming feast. 11 days to prepare for war. On the 5th day, Marin introduced Soraya to a young man named Corvin, a guard from Draven's personal detail who had been beaten unconscious for refusing to swear loyalty to Havroth. Draven sent me, Corvin said. Before they locked him in the barracks, he managed to get a message out. He said to find the girl who made it rain indoors. Corvin brought intelligence. Havroth had alliances with 2 of the 5 territorial lords. A third was wavering. The remaining 2, Lord Sethwick of the southern marshes and Lady Raven of the western highlands, opposed the edict, but had not acted because they lacked proof. Draven has already sent word to both that someone wishes to speak with them about the Karlstrom curse, Corvin said. He also brought something else. The king's wolf howled last night, through 3 walls and a locked door. The first howl from the Karlstrom Alpha in years. His voice softened. Draven said you would understand what that means. Soraya's hand moved to her chest. The bond pulsed beneath her palm. Kale was fighting. Even buried under the frost, even drugged into compliance, his wolf was clawing toward the surface. Toward her. Meeting 2 territorial lords while being hunted by a third required subterfuge Soraya had never imagined herself capable of. She arrived at the southern guest house through the drainage channels, dripping wet, and placed the journal on the table between them. Lord Sethwick was small and wiry, with eyes the color of peat. Lady Raven was his opposite, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a woman who had commanded armies. You are the kitchen girl, Raven said. I am the king's mate, Soraya replied. 2 hours of the most intense conversation of her life followed. She told them everything. Sethwick verified the handwriting and seal impressions against known Havroth correspondence. If we support you at the claiming feast, we are declaring war on House Havroth, Raven said. The Iron Fang controls a quarter of Arendor's military force. If the truth is spoken publicly, Havroth's allies will abandon him. No house will support a lord who has been poisoning the royal bloodline for a century. Raven studied her for a long moment. Your mother was Lyrian. She healed my daughter when no one else could. A fever that should have been fatal. When I heard she had died, I suspected foul play. But I had no proof. She stood. You have your alliance, Water Singer. At the claiming feast, Sethwick and I will ensure you are heard. What happens after that depends on the strength of your evidence and the courage of your king. The great assembly hall had been transformed for the claiming feast. Every territorial banner hung from the rafters. Every seat was filled. The 5 lords occupied the horseshoe-shaped high table, with Lord Havroth at the center. And on the throne of black stone sat Kyle, dressed in ceremonial black, his face the frozen mask Soraya had come to despise. But she could feel him through the bond, stronger now than it had been on any of her nightly visits. The antidote Marin had been feeding her in increasing doses was winning the war against the frost extract, and the wall between them had thinned to something almost transparent. She could feel his awareness of her presence in the building, a low hum of recognition. "I am here." She pushed through the bond. "I know. I have known since you entered the building." His voice was clearer than it had been in days. "Whatever you are about to do, I am with you, even if I cannot show it." Valeria sat beside him on a smaller throne, her auburn hair twisted with iron ornaments, carrying herself with the proprietary confidence of a woman who believed her victory was complete. The feast progressed through its ceremonial stages. Speeches, toasts, a display of gifts from Valeria's family, each one a statement of wealth and power. Through it all, Kale sat motionless, a statue on a stolen throne. Then came the moment Soraya had been waiting for. The elder of ceremonies rose. By tradition, the 15th day of the claiming period offers an open forum. Any wolf of Arendor may address the assembly on matters pertaining to the king's union. "Are there any who wish to speak?" Lady Revenge stood. "I wish to speak." A murmur rippled through the hall. Havroth's eyes narrowed. "Before this assembly accepts the union between our king and Lady Valeria, I invoke the right of testimony, an ancient provision that allows any wolf with evidence pertaining to the fitness of a claiming to present that evidence before the territorial council." The murmur became a roar. Havroth was on his feet. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the Frost Edict was invoked under false pretenses, that the curse used to justify the king's inability to bond is not a curse at all, but a deliberate and sustained act of poisoning perpetrated against the Kalestrom bloodline." Lord Sethwick rose beside her. "The right of testimony is absolute. It cannot be denied by any lord, including you, Havroth." Raven turned toward the servants' entrance at the eastern wall. "I call Soraya, daughter of Lyrian, water singer of No House, true mate to King Kale of the Kalestrom line." The servants' door opened, and Soraya stepped into the light. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in the hall stared at the young woman who walked toward the center of the assembly floor in a simple dress with a leather journal clutched against her chest. She was nobody. Kitchen-born. Common-blooded. And she walked with the straight-back determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Valeria's face drained of color. "Father." Silence. Havroth's voice was a blade. Soraya reached the center of the hall. She could feel every gaze upon her, the judgment, the confusion, the hostility from Havroth's allies, and the cautious hope from those who sensed that something fundamental was about to shift. And through it all, she felt Kale. His presence in the bond was a furnace barely contained. The frost was cracking under the pressure of his will, and she realized he was not just fighting to reach her. He was fighting to be free. She held the journal above her head. "My name is Soraya. My mother was Lyrian, the last water singer of Arendor. She was murdered 20 years ago by agents acting on behalf of a house in this room." She let the words settle before continuing. "This journal documents the systematic poisoning of the Kalestrom bloodline using a compound called frost extract. Every entry spanning over 100 years is signed with the Havroth family seal." "She is a kitchen rat trying to steal what does not belong to her," Valeria shrieked from the throne. "Then you will have no objection to the journal being examined," Lord Sethwick said calmly. "I have already verified the handwriting and seal impressions against known Havroth correspondence. They are genuine." Soraya faced the assembly. "The curse is not real. It never was. King Kale's wolf is not dead. His ability to bond was buried under decades of frost extract administered by the family that now claims the right to place their daughter on his throne." "You have no proof beyond a stolen journal," Havroth said, his voice carefully controlled. I have the proof of my own body. Soraya placed her hand over her heart. I carry a bond with the king. A true mate bond. It ignited the night before the Frost Edict was invoked. Ask any wolf in this room whether a true bond can be faked. Murmuring swept the hall. A true mate bond was the most sacred connection in their world. It could not be manufactured, could not be simulated, could not be mistaken for anything else. Prove it, Raven said. Not unkindly. A strategic prompt. Soraya looked at Kale. He sat on the throne, frozen, gray-eyed, motionless. To every wolf in the hall, he appeared exactly as the frost wanted him to appear. Empty. Broken. But she could feel him behind the ice, hammering, raging. She closed her eyes and reached. Not with her hands, with the bond. She gathered every ounce of warmth she possessed, every memory of his voice through the cracks in the frost, every whispered word exchanged in the darkness of his chamber, and she poured it through the connection with the force of a river breaking through a dam. The hall gasped. Golden light bloomed from Soraya's chest. It spiraled outward in tendrils visible to every wolf in the room, reaching across the space toward the throne like luminous vines seeking sunlight. The tendrils touched Kael. The frost fought. Soraya could feel it resisting, a century of manufactured cold pushing back with everything it had. Kael's body shuddered on the throne. His hands gripped the armrests until the black stone cracked beneath his fingers. "Stop her!" Havroth roared. "Guards, seize her now!" Soldiers surged forward from the walls, but before they could reach her, a wall of wolves materialized between them and Soraya. Sethwick's Marshland Guard, Raven's Highland warriors. They had been stationed throughout the hall, disguised among the crowd, waiting for exactly this moment. "Touch her," Raven said from her seat, her voice carrying the quiet promise of absolute violence, "and the Western Highlands will consider it an act of war." The soldiers hesitated, and in that hesitation, the frost broke. Kael's eyes exploded with amber fire. The transformation was not gradual. It was volcanic. Years of suppressed emotion, years of stolen warmth, years of manufactured emptiness, all of it detonated at once. The cold king shattered like a shell, and what emerged from beneath was something the assembled wolves had never seen. The Alpha King rose from his throne. His movements were fluid, powerful, charged with the predatory grace of a wolf that had been caged and had just tasted open air. The power radiating from him was staggering, not diminished by years of frost but concentrated by it, compressed and superheated like magma beneath a glacier. He stepped down from the dais. Every step cracked the stone beneath his feet. Wolves throughout the hall involuntarily bowed their heads in submission. He walked toward Soraya. The wolves between them parted without being asked. Sethwick's guard stepped aside. Raven's warriors lowered their heads. Even Havroth's soldiers retreated, their instincts overriding their orders in the face of an alpha whose power was shaking the foundations of the hall. Kyle stopped before her. Soraya looked up into the face of the man she had found in the dark. The mask was gone. The frost was gone. What remained was raw and fierce and so full of feeling that it hurt to look at. "You came for me," he said. His real voice, unbroken, deep as bedrock. "I told you I would. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself. Someone had to." His hand came up to cup her face. Light erupted between them with such force that wolves across the hall shielded their eyes. Through the bond, she felt everything he had been holding back behind the frost. Years of solitude, years of believing he was broken beyond repair. And then the rain, and her, and the first crack of warmth in an endless winter. His gratitude, so vast it had no edges. His rage at the Havroths. His terror that this moment was temporary. And beneath all of it, deeper than fear, older than rage, love as a force of nature, tectonic, inevitable. as fundamental as gravity. You are not broken, Soraya whispered, her hand covering his where it rested against her cheek. You were never broken. They tried to make you believe you were, and you survived anyway. I survived because fate was saving me for you. This changes nothing. Havroth's voice cut through the moment like a blade. The Frost Edict has been invoked. The claiming period is active. Whatever bond this girl claims to share with the king, it does not supersede the law. Kale turned to face him. The look in the Alpha King's eyes made Havroth take an involuntary step backward. You poisoned my father, Kale said. His voice was quiet, calm, infinitely dangerous. You poisoned his father before him. You poisoned me. You stole my wolf, my warmth, my ability to feel anything at all. And when the one person capable of breaking through your poison appeared, you drugged her too. These are baseless accusations. The journal is not baseless. The frost extract in my veins is not baseless. The vial your agents used to drug my mate in my own chamber is not baseless. Kale extended his hand toward Soraya, without looking away from Havroth. Soraya took it. The bond blazed between them, a ribbon of golden light connecting their clasped hands, pulsing with unmistakable, undeniable truth. A true mate bond, Kale said, witnessed by every wolf present. You invoked the Frost Edict on the grounds that my wolf could not bond. My wolf is bonded. Your edict is void. Havroth's calculation was visible on his face. He swept the room for allies and found fewer than he expected. Wolves who had supported his bid were staring at the golden light, their political loyalty overwhelmed by instinctive recognition. A true mate bond was sacred, undeniable, and it was shining before them with a brilliance that no amount of political maneuvering could dismiss. Valeria, Havroth said. His daughter rose from the throne, and Soraya saw something in her hand that made her blood stop. A vial, larger than the one that had been used on Soraya, filled with liquid so dark it seemed to absorb the torchlight. Concentrated frost extract. If I cannot have the throne through law, Havroth said, his mask finally dropping to reveal the ruthless ambition beneath, then I will ensure the Kalestrom line ends tonight. Valeria hurled the vial at Kael. Time slowed. Soraya saw the vial spinning through the air, dark liquid sloshing against glass. She saw wolves diving for cover. She saw Kale's hand tighten around hers, his body shifting to shield her. But she was not the one who needed shielding. The concentrated frost extract was meant for him. A lethal dose, designed to freeze the Kalestrom bloodline permanently, to kill his wolf, sever the bond, and turn the Alpha King into a hollow shell that no amount of warmth could ever reach. Soraya stepped in front of Kale, raised her free hand, and sang. The melody erupted with a force that shook the hall. Not the gentle humming she had used in the rain, not the quiet song that had woken the water channels beneath the citadel. This was something primal, something that had been building inside her for 20 years, since the night her mother was killed and the gift passed, dormant and furious, into her infant daughter's blood. The water answered. Every source in the great assembly hall responded at once, wine from goblets, decorative fountains flanking the dais, moisture in the air itself. Water exploded from vessels and basins and stone channels, converging on Soraya in a spiral that whipped her hair and tore at her dress. The vial shattered against the wall of water. Frost extract dispersed harmlessly, neutralized on contact by the golden warmth infusing every droplet. Soraya held the barrier with one hand raised and the melody pouring from her throat, and for the first time in her life, she understood what she was. Not a kitchen girl with a strange gift, a water singer, the last of her kind, and the most dangerous woman in Arendor. Havroth drew a blade from beneath his ceremonial robes and charged. Kale shifted. One heartbeat he was a man holding Soraya's hand. The next, an enormous wolf with fur the color of midnight stood beside her, his size dwarfing every other wolf in the room, his eyes blazing with golden fire. His howl shattered the windows of the great assembly hall. Glass exploded outward. The sound reverberated through the citadel, through the city, through the mountains beyond. It was not just a howl, it was a declaration, a summons, an alpha calling his wolves home, and they answered. From every corner of Ashenmere, wolves responded. The citadel guard who had been waiting for a signal, soldiers from the barracks, common wolves from the lower ward who had felt the bond pulse through the city like a second heartbeat. From the main doors, a battered but unbowed figure limped into the fray. Draven, ribs still taped, a gash above his eye bleeding freely, but his wolf was fully present. The barracks door was locked, Draven announced to no one in particular. I unlocked it. Behind him, 24 of the king's personal guard poured into the hall. Havroth saw his forces crumbling. I am the lord of the Iron Fang. My family has shaped this kingdom for a century. Kale shifted back to human form. He stood before Havroth with no weapon, no armor, nothing but the raw power of an alpha whose curse had just been broken, and whose mate stood at his back, surrounded by a column of singing water. Your family poisoned this kingdom for a century, and it ends now. Havroth lunged. Soraya's water caught the blade, a tendril of luminous liquid wrapping around the steel and wrenching it from his grip. Before he could recover, Kale's hand closed around his throat. Not with killing force, with the deliberate control of a king who had learned what it meant to be powerless and who refused to become the monster his enemies had tried to create. Rendrik Havroth, you are charged with the murder of Lyrian the Water Singer, with the assassination of her mate, with the systematic poisoning of the Kalestrom royal line across 5 generations, with conspiracy to seize the throne of Arendor through manufactured affliction, and with the attempted murder of my true mate. He released him. Havroth collapsed to his knees. Kale turned to Soraya. The water lowered around her as her song faded to silence. She stood in the wreckage of the great assembly hall, soaked and shaking, surrounded by spilled wine and shattered glass and the stares of every wolf in Arendor. He crossed to her in 3 strides. His hands found her face, his thumbs tracing the tracks of tears she had not realized she was shedding. I owe you a debt I cannot repay. You have given me back everything they stole. I do not want a debt. Soraya's hands came up to grip his wrists. I want a bond. A real one. Completed. Permanent. One that no poison and no politics can ever touch. Here? Now? Before everyone? I have spent my entire life being invisible. I am done hiding in walls and crawling through water channels. Let them see. Let every wolf in this kingdom see what a true bond looks like. Something broke open in Kale's expression. The last fragment of the mask, the final shard of ice, dissolved. He tilted his head and bared his throat. The most powerful wolf in 5 territories, offering his most vulnerable point to a kitchen girl from the lower ward. Soraya's wolf rose within her. No longer the ghost whisper of her childhood, but a presence as fierce and certain as the water that answered her call. She pressed her lips to the place where his pulse hammered against his skin, and she bit. The bond completed with a sound like the world drawing its first breath. Golden light erupted from the claiming mark and cascaded through the hall in waves. Every wolf present felt it, a pulse of warmth carrying the unmistakable resonance of a true mate bond settling into permanence. The ambient unease that had plagued the kingdom for generations dissolved like snow in sunlight. Kale's hands threaded through her hair as the bond poured his essence into her and drew hers into him. She saw herself through his eyes, the girl in the rain who had shattered years of darkness with nothing but a melody and bare feet on wet stone. The woman who had crawled through water channels and faced down lords and stood in the center of a hostile hall armed with nothing but a dead man's journal and the stubborn refusal to let the world stay broken. the most extraordinary soul he had ever encountered, glowing like a star. And he saw himself through hers. Not the cold king, not the curse, not the frozen mask. A man who had endured the unendurable and emerged on the other side with his capacity for love, not just intact, but magnified by every year it had been denied. A man worth crossing darkness for. A man worth singing for. A man whose heart had been worth finding, even at the bottom of an ocean of ice. When she released him, the mark on his throat shimmered silver gold. "My queen," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotions he was still relearning how to feel. "My king," Soraya answered. Draven, battered and bleeding and grinning for the first time in months, dropped to one knee. The true Queen of Arendor. One by one, wolves throughout the hall followed. Sethwick, Raven, the Citadel Guard, the common wolves who had flooded in from the lower ward. Even some of Havroth's former allies, their political calculations overwhelmed by the undeniable truth of what they had just witnessed. The Alpha King had found his mate, and the curse that had held his kingdom in winter for 100 years was finally, irrevocably broken. In the weeks that followed, the Havroths faced judgment. Lord Rendrick was stripped of his title, his lands, and his wolf. He was exiled to the barren reaches beyond the northern ice, condemned to live out his remaining years as the hollow, powerless thing he had tried to make of the Kaelstrom kings. Valeria was imprisoned in the southern marshes under Sethwick's watchful eye. Her wolf was not taken, a mercy Soraya had quietly requested, arguing that the daughter should not pay the full price for the father's century of sins. Some called it weakness. Kale called it proof that his queen was better than her enemies deserved. Draven healed. When Kale offered him a commendation before the court, the old beta simply said, "I did my job, my king. The remarkable one is her." Marin stepped out of hiding for the first time in 23 years. The old order of healers began to re-emerge. Water singers were not the only gift the noble houses had tried to eradicate. There were bone menders, flame speakers, earth callers, all of them suppressed for generations. Soraya found them, one by one, and offered them something none had ever been given: a home, a purpose, safety. The kingdom healed slowly but surely. Crops grew taller. Pups born in the spring shifted earlier and stronger than any generation in living memory. The feral wolves that had roamed the borderlands returned to their human forms and wept with confusion and relief. And on a summer evening, 3 months after the claiming feast, Soraya stood on the same courtyard cobblestones where she had once danced alone. She was not alone now. Kale stood at the edge of the courtyard, leaning against a pillar. No crown, no ceremonial armor, just a simple dark shirt and an expression of quiet, steady, unshakable wonder. "It is going to rain," he said. Soraya tilted her face toward the sky. "I know," and smiled. The first drops fell. They struck the cobblestones and exploded into tiny starbursts of light where her bare feet had already begun to move. She spun slowly, arms outstretched, just as she had on the night that changed everything. But this time, the rain did not bend to her will alone. Kale stepped into the courtyard. The bond hummed with a resonance Soraya felt in her marrow, and when he took her hand and pulled her into him, the rain erupted into spirals of golden light. They danced. The Alpha King of Arendor danced with his mate in the rain, while the water sang and the citadel glowed, and wolves throughout the kingdom lifted their heads and howled, with a joy denied them for 100 years. "I never thanked you properly," Kale murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For dancing in the rain that night. For being brave enough to be yourself when every force in the world was telling you to be invisible." Soraya pulled back to look at him. Rain streamed down both their faces. "I was not being brave," she said. "I was being lonely. I danced because I had no one to talk to." Kale's hand came up to tangle in her wet hair. And now? Now I have you. She pressed her forehead to his. And you have me. And neither of us will ever be invisible again. He kissed her. The rain sang around them, golden and warm and alive. And in the great records of Arendor, a new chapter was inscribed. The story of a cold king who had forgotten how to feel, and the kitchen girl who danced in the rain and reminded him. Of a curse that was not a curse but a crime, shattered by a bond that no amount of poison could kill. Of a water singer who crawled through the darkness to save a man the world had given up on, and a king who tore down his own frozen walls to reach her. They had found each other in the space between frost and fire, and they would burn together until the last rain fell. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.